Ni hao, konnichiwa, shalom, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jumbo.
Bienvenidos! Hey, my name is Jedley. This is Reading with Your Kids. We are beaming out to you in the entire universe from the beautiful, historical, book-loving neighborhood of Reedville, the loveliest neighborhood in all of Boston. We are so very happy and so wicked proud that you are joining us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by sharing fun, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. Please join us in spreading the word about the show by telling all of your family and friends that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network, and they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Good Pods, YouTube. Wherever you find your favorite shows, you can find Reading with Your Kids. Really exciting show for you today. First up, Rebecca Caprera is here to celebrate her middle grade novel in verse, Eva to the Max. And later in the show, Phyllis Harris joins us to celebrate her wordless picture book called Claude. Hey, this is a message for all the authors that are listening. You know, you worked hard on your book. You spent months, maybe years, writing, revising, dreaming, and believing. You created characters, solved problems, overcame doubts, and brought a story into the world that only you could tell. Now it's time to help readers discover it. The Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program was created to celebrate outstanding children's books and to help authors reach more families. When a book earns our seal of approval, we don't stop with an award certificate. We review the book, feature it on the podcast, share it across social media, and help introduce it to parents, teachers, librarians, and caregivers who are looking for great books to share with kids. Because your story matters. And the families who need your story deserve a chance to find it. Please visit readingwithyourkids.com and click the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page to learn more. That's readingwithyourkids.com. Let your book find the readers it was written for. This episode of Reading with Your Kids is brought to you by Fart Boy and Reeky Dog, Dino Doom. Fantastic new graphic novel written by New York Times bestselling author Joan Holub, who's written over 200 amazing books for kids. It's school sleepover at the museum. What could go wrong? Well, how about this? A snack-fueled explosion of garbanzo beans and peanuts unleashes a stink so powerful it brings the dinosaurs back to life. Now, Fart Boy, Reeky Dog, and their friends are in the middle of a dino-sized disaster. They have to solve tricky riddles, find missing bones, and stop the stinkiest villain of all, Professor Gravy Pants. Because if they don't, the dinosaurs could take over. Or worse, they could become Dino Dinner. This action-packed graphic novel is bursting with friendships, adventure, and enough laughs to shake the museum walls. If your kids love superheroes, if they love dinosaurs, and if they love to laugh until they can't breathe, then Fart Boy and Reeky Dog Dino Doom is the book for you. Because sometimes the power to save the world comes from the unlikeliest place. Grab your copy today and get ready for a reading adventure that's truly dynamite. Joining us right now from not too far from our Reedville studios, our guest is here today to celebrate her middle grade novel in verse. It's called Eva to the Max. Please welcome to the show, Rebecca Caprera. Rebecca, how are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me. I don't have a tail, even though that's what it looks like. I have a visitor. This is Whisker, and she's here for moral support, and apparently to live out her podcast dreams.
There you go. There you go. All right. Well, nice to see you, Kat. Thanks for coming in. And you do look like you have a tail there. It's very cute.
Well, I mean, it's fitting for a children's book author, I guess. A little whimsy never hurt anybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Tell us about Eva to the Max. This young woman sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, so this is a brand new middle grade novel written in verse, which means it's told through poetry. It is a contemporary novel for middle grade readers, and it follows the the protagonist, who is a 12-year-old motocross phenom named Eva. Her nickname is Eva Knievel. And she sets her sights on qualifying for national championships. But first she'll have to overcome obstacles on the race course, at home, and at school.
What kind of obstacles would a 12-year-old girl doing motocross come across? I can think of a whole lot, but to tell us which ones Eva runs into.
There's a lot. So there's some tension between her and her mother. There's some familial tension. Her father was a racer and sort of a stuntman and had a pretty terrible accident. He is paralyzed as a result of this, but he still works in the garage. He's very supportive of her dream. He kind of knows that world, but he also knows, the costs, emotional, physical, financial. And her mother wants to be supportive of her, but it's sort of this delicate balance, right? When you have a child who is inherently a daredevil and you're trying to balance being supportive and keeping them safe. So there's some of those tensions at home. She has sort of a perfect older brother, right, who's studying for the SATs and is an overachiever, and she feels like she can never really break free of his shadow and kind of live up to him. So those are some of the familial tensions. In her previous school, she was bullied for being a girl who was a dirt bike racer, right? It wasn't something a lot of other kids in her community were into. And so she's changed schools. She does have a bit of a temper, right? I think she's her own worst enemy sometimes, as many of us are. And so she's learning to tame her temper. She's learning to sort of tune out the noise and the expectations of others and sort of find the courage to blaze her own trail. And then, of course, there's the very literal obstacles that she encounters on the track. And some of that is the inequalities within the sport related to women and girls and the opportunities that they have to compete and race at a high level versus those of the boys. And then, there's jumps and there's tough competitors and there's hairpin turns and there's all the physical challenges of learning to ride this machine and excelling and being the fastest.
Yeah.
While also, not crashing, wiping out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's kind of sad. I'm almost 100 years old, but back.
Well, I'm 99, so you're in good company.
Back in the 60s when I was running the streets, and my cousin Darlene was the absolute best athlete in our neighborhood. And we had no problem. We wanted her to play with us, against us, but every once in a while when our local Sandlot Park team would go to another park, there'd be some teams that would refuse to play us. I don't know why. It's like, well, if you think you're better than a girl, then you should play us and beat us. I mean, and I know things are better for women in sports now, but it's still a shame that that so many people can relate to, like Eva. Oh yeah, she's probably going to run into people who don't want to race him because she's a girl.
Right. And even just in the research portion of this book, looking at kind of the history, I actually include an author's note at the end that's a sort of a brief history of women in the sport. And it was really interesting diving into the research. Some women would race under pseudonyms and in kind of incognito so that they could appear, present as male so that they could have a chance to compete. Often in motocross races, up until very recently, there were far fewer races for women, a women's only division, and they would often be held at kind of the worst times when the lighting was really poor, when the track was at its worst. The winning purses would be substantially less than those of the men. So it was kind of riddled with all these hurdles. But thankfully, it seems as though the people who gravitate toward the sport tend to be a headstrong bunch. And so it's been exciting, especially in the last decade or so, and even the last few years, as the WMX, which is the women's branch of racing, professional racing, has kind of had a revival, and just to see the progress that's being made.
Now, you mentioned WMX. This is the first time I've heard of that. You're not telling me that BMX stands for boys motocross, are you?
No, that's pedal bikes, I believe. But
okay.
Women's motocross. And, it's had a lot of different acronyms over the course of its various iterations and lifespans. So I think it may also be called WMA at some point. But, I think BMX is something different.
Yeah. Tell me, a lot of authors come on and they tell me that their main character in a lot of ways was based on them or part of them or something that they had wanted to be. Is that the case with Eva? Did you have a little motocross rider in your spirit?
So I gave birth to one, my youngest daughter. This book is dedicated to my youngest daughter, who has been just this daredevil, this tenacious, little soul from the moment she was born. Actually, when she was born, her umbilical cord was tied in all these knots because she'd been somersaulting so much in utero. And so this has just been one of her defining characteristics from the get-go. So I think I'm actually a little bit more like her mother in this story in terms of that grappling with letting them fledge and letting your child be who they are, authentically so, and letting them chase these big dreams, but also trying to balance, safety, right? Mm-hmm. And well-being. There is definitely wish fulfillment in terms of Eva and myself. I am not historically a speed demon in any way, but I admire those who have that bravery. So it's been fun to kind of put yourself in the shoes of someone who does chase things at that kind of level.
Yeah. It's fun. One of the things that I loved doing when my kids were younger is I loved being part of what they wanted to do, and help and support them. My daughter danced forever, and, being part of that the dance families, that are at the recitals, at the competitions, my son with football and wrestling and kind of going out there and, yeah, you want me to hold the yard markers? Okay, whatever it takes. And I think that's a really cool family thing for families to go out there and support our kids in what they're doing.
Yeah, and there's a line in the book. There's kind of a variation of a line that appears twice in the story, and Eva's talking about the fact that there's so many different ways to be a girl, and then conversely, her best friend in the story is named Toby, and he's not into dirt bikes. He's really into art, and especially kind of large-scale installation art, like mobiles. He's really inspired by Calder and some other artists like that. And so his path is also different than a lot of the boys in their area. And so he talks about the fact that there's so many different ways to be a boy. There's so many, we should just extend grace and empathy to everyone navigating that path of self-discovery, whatever their gender or identity. I think that's just kind of a component of the story, is letting letting you be yourself and extending that same grace to others.
Yeah. One of the things I think that a lot of parents could probably relate to is that whole idea of, gee, I want my kid to be out there and doing what they're passionate about, but why do you have to be passionate about something so dangerous? I don't want you to get hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's where a lot of that's one source of the tension and the stakes in the story, right? It's a sport. One of the things I liked about this book when I started writing it was there was sort of this built-in stakes, right? A race already has kind of this time component, right? That makes a scene exciting. And then when you introduce the specter of danger, it kind of amps up the stakes even more. And so you realize that there's a lot on the line, not just in terms of ego and victory, but physically too. And there's some pretty epic wipeouts that happen, and there's different repercussions as a result of that.
Yeah, I have to ask, and you can choose not to answer, but has your daughter been involved in any of those epic wipeouts, and how did you react?
No, thank God, not on a bike. It's funny, in the early days of the COVID lockdown, when everything was so uncertain, I remember saying to both of them, I said, whatever you do, nobody's getting hurt. We're not going to the hospital. Like, we're not, there's no injuries at home. We were all homeschooling and quarantined at home. And I said, the hospital was an uncertain place at that time, right? So nobody wanted to go. I said, whatever you do, don't get hurt. 2 days later, she fell off the jungle gym and broke her arm. And so we found ourselves in the hospital. I feel like I just jinxed it. So, but thankfully, knock on wood, that has been the extent of our bumps and bruises.
Now, this book is written in verse, which is something that I've been doing the podcast since 2017, and I know novels in verse have been around, but it really seems to be popular these days, and there are a lot more books that we're celebrating here in the podcast. Why did you choose to write Eva to the max in verse?
That's a great question. So I write in both, my novels are in both prose and verse. I have to say I'm partial to verse. I love that format. I feel like it's so liberating. There's really no rules. I mean, you can kind of sculpt the style to suit your story. And I think it's really appealing to, you mentioned that you're seeing kind of an uptick of them in the market. I think it's appealing to emerging readers, maybe reluctant readers. I find a lot of crossover for kids who are gravitating towards graphic novels, are also really find verse novels appealing. And I think that's because there's a layer of visual storytelling that takes place in both of those. I come from a background in architecture and design, so I'm very visual, and I like to think about, when I'm crafting my poems, about kind of painting with the words on the page, and introduce a lot of concrete poetry throughout the story. I'm going to try to find some examples. So here's, like, being playful about the way that we're placing words on the page. There's a few. I won't find all of them now, but there's sometimes where the words become a wheel, or are kind of reinforcing this idea that's happening, or a theme that's happening in the moment. And so being playful kind of artistically on the page with the words is really fun. The other thing I feel like works well for verse in this book is that motocross is such a sensory rich sport. When I first told someone I was writing a book about dirt bikes, but I was going to be writing in poetry, they were like, those things don't go together. But I think the juxtaposition is kind of rich. And if you've ever heard a motorcycle, even just going down the street, it's so explosive from a sound point of view, right? It pops, it growls, it revs. So playing with onomatopoeia in the poetry, playing with kind of a lyricism, and even rhyme. This is my first book where I introduce a little bit of rhyme, kind of selectively. So kind of playing with the musical lyricism of the sport in an unexpected way, in a way that really only poetry allowed me to do versus prose.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, with poetry, is there like, when I talk to a picture book author, we talk about the fact that the author needs to leave room for the illustrator to tell part of the story. I'm thinking, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that when you're reading in verse, that your imagination has more license to kind of imagine the story, as opposed to strict prose, which is like, he said this and it looked exactly like this, and and everything is kind of spelled out. Whereas in verse, some things might be left to interpretation.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to describe it. I think because verse has so much more white space on the page, right? We're telling a story with an economy of words, right? We have to, they traditionally have a much lower word count than, their companion novel written in prose, like you mentioned. So we have to do a lot more with a lot less, right? Those words really have to pack a punch, and the way we put them on the page has to be meaningful. But you're right. I think it's almost like a sketch, right? As opposed to like a fully realized rendering, right? A sketch, there's so much room within a sketch for your imagination to fill in the gaps. And a verse novel is very much like that. So yeah, that's a great observation you had.
I'm thinking too, the verse fits the motocross. I never did motocross, but I did ride a motorcycle for a number of years. And one of the things that I used to tell people was you had to be a flow between you and the machine. You couldn't try to control it too much. Otherwise, you'd crash. And I mean, you're going to crash anyway. Anybody who rides a motorcycle is going to crash. It's not if it's when, right? Yeah. So,
yeah.
But you're likely to have less wins if you're kind of, it's hard to describe, but not trying to control everything. You're trying to go with the machine and the flow that the machine is making.
Yeah. There's a series of poems when Eva, she crashes one bike, spoiler alert, and she ends up getting a new bike. And there's this kind of getting to know you, push and pull scene where she's trying to be like, I'm the boss, and the bike is sort of not cooperating, and it also parallels a scene in which she's making a new friend, right? Kind of opening herself up, kind of taking down some of the walls that she's built up around herself, and allowing herself to be vulnerable with a new friend is echoed in the dynamic that she has learning to use this new bike, right? And finding that balance that you're talking about, and learning to kind of go with the flow.
Yeah. I'm curious, now you demonstrated, you showed us that there are different structures, I guess, of how the words are printed on the page. Is there, when we're learning about Eva, and when we're hearing her, we're listening to her thoughts in the verse, is there a consistent kind of style of verse that you use when you're speaking about Eva or when Eva is speaking?
Yeah, there's a variety of kind of poem types, I guess, that I use. There are some quieter, more interior scenes with her that is kind of a typical free verse. And then there's also, there are some feistier poems that actually feel more like music, or like kind of like a rap, like with rhythm and flow almost, where she's giving a little bit of attitude. And those are the poems where we see some rhyme come in. And then there are other scenes that are a bit more poignant, that may be more kind of removed from her interiority a little bit. So I play with a lot of different types. I also have scattered throughout some real life quotes from Eva Knievel, who starts out as her hero, and then she comes to sort of, they say never meet your heroes. She comes to understand more about his life and sort of what he was about beyond the fancy leather jumpsuits and the tricks and the stunts, and some of the things that she doesn't want to emulate. And so I think there's this moment where she is breaking away from that advice that we see, the evil's voice in her head at certain scenes. She decides to kind of tune him out and do her own thing and follow her heart. So there's a variety of poem types I try to use, and I try to be somewhat consistent about how the reader is experiencing those different poems. There's a rhythm to that. I have a very chaotic brain, especially when I'm writing verse. I write my verse novels completely out of order, which makes for a disaster of a revision process. I don't necessarily recommend this to others, but that's how I work. And so I usually, early in the process, am drafting these kind of keystone poems that are, they set the tone for the story. They help me discover what it's really about. And then I let myself be really playful and loose and experimental as I create the bridges between those beats. And so I print off all the poems on these little quarter-size sheets, and I spread them out. They take over my office, they take over my kitchen floor, and I'm moving it around like a giant, like a patchwork quilt. So I can see visually when these different poem types are appearing, so that there is sort of a rhythm that's happening. Whether the reader is ever aware of that or not, I don't know, but it helps me organize the story.
Yeah. You mentioned this at the crossover between verse and graphic novels. Has there ever been a graphic novel in verse? We have not celebrated a graphic novel in verse, to my knowledge. Do you know if that's been attempted?
Forms. Jarrett Lerner has a book called Work in Progress, which blends he's an illustrator and a writer. And so that novel I know blends, it's not like panelized graphic novels like we might think like a comic book, but it is heavily illustrated. I think there's a desire for more of that. I'd love to see more of those hybrid formats.
Yeah. It's an exciting time, I think, in literature, because with the advent of screens, we have to really work hard to help our kids develop a love of reading and help them remember that it is still incredibly important, and it's the key to success. But at the same time, I think because of screens and because of technology, I think publishers are kind of open more to new ideas and new ways of communicating and telling stories.
Yeah, and I think we're up for the challenge. I think you're absolutely right. We're competing with 20-second TikToks, or even shorter, right? We have these attention spans that are seeking these dopamine hits. So how do we deliver that through the written word, and how do we combat the literacy crisis, like you said? And I think it's just, I think will always be a place for traditional prose and poetry and those, forms of storytelling. But I think we also should be inventive about connecting with readers where they are. And like you said, children's literature in particular, I feel strongly that it is the foundation, the bedrock of literacy and lifelong reading and learning. And I mean, I am the reader and the writer that I am today because of the books I read as a kid and the educators and the librarians that put those books in my hands. So I'm, just hopeful that we can continue that for others.
One of the things I hear a lot from authors is that they tell me, I was surprised when my character did this, and when my character said that. Is there more or less of that in a novel written in verse?
I think there's a lot of that. I think there's also a lot of that for anyone, or I guess I'll just speak for myself because that's all I know, but I'm not traditionally someone who outlines my novels in advance, as you can probably tell by my chaos process. But I love the process of discovery, which is sort of when those characters pop up and say, start showing you their voice, right? And doing things that you hadn't really anticipated. So I think perhaps if you're outlining a novel in advance and are very organized about that, maybe you have less of those encounters. But I love, I'm a very intuitive writer, so I'm kind of listening for those voices. I'm often like summoning the muse and making little offerings to the writing gods in hopes that they'll deliver some good stuff.
Yeah. What does your daughter think about Eva to the Max?
She's happy. She likes it. She likes that she has a book dedicated just to her and not her older sister. I've dedicated other books to my children in the past, but this one was just for her. And it's nice because she's right around the age that Eva is now, even though I've been writing this book for years, even before she turned the age she is now. But it's always fun. They're my biggest fans, and they're also my toughest critics, which I appreciate because I can run, especially things like dialogue by them, and they'll be brutally honest, and they'll say, "Mama, that's not funny," or "Kids don't say that." They keep me in check and keep me in line, and you need that sometimes.
Yeah. Did you work any 6-7 into Eva to the Max?
You know what? Actually, it was accidental. So she has a car. Eva has a old rust bucket of a '67 Mustang that she is she's working on in her family garage, and it's sort of like her labor of love and her project that she hopes to drive one day when she gets older. And I had just chosen that because I like the '67 Mustang, and my daughter was just like, "Mom, everyone's going to say 6-7 when they're reading this," so. Although I feel like that's already fallen out of favor, so I can't keep up with these trends,
Hey, tell me, you told me before we hit record that you are here in the greater Hyde Park area. Reedville is part of this bigger neighborhood called Hyde Park, and you were working with kids. First off, hats off to you to do a presentation the week before the end of school.
On a hot day. They were melting. They were such troopers. Yes. Yeah. It was actually, I have to give a shout out to Mayor Wu and the Office of Arts and Culture, because they are the ones, along with the Poet Laureate of Boston, who have put on this wonderful program called the Living Poets Project for Boston. And so it's pairing poets and teaching artists with schools, so that we can bring poetry to life in the classroom and read our own work, but then also create opportunities for kids to write their own poems and read their own poems and share their work. And some of the poetry that we created together this week will be included in an anthology that's hopefully coming out next year.
Oh, so, great.
Yeah, it's always fun to pass on my love of verse novels to the readers that it's intended for. And actually, it was very neat. I have to give another shout out to my local independent bookstore, the Silver Unicorn in Acton, Mass. Mm-hmm. They were wonderful about getting together a very last minute book order. And so every kid that participated in our workshop got to take home a copy of Eva to the Max that I signed for them for summer reading. So that was very nice.
Fantastic. Well, let's tell everybody where they can go to find out more about Eva to the Max and find out more about you.
Sure. So you can visit my website. It's RebeccaCaprera.com. I'm sporadically online on Instagram at Rebecca Caprera. My books are available wherever books are sold, and signed and personalized copies are always available at the Silver Unicorn. You can visit their website as well.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of Eva to the Max, a new middle grade novel in verse from our guest, Rebecca Caprera. Rebecca, thanks so much for being on Reading with Your Kids, and thanks for coming to the neighborhood and supporting those kids.
Thank you so much. This was a lovely conversation. I feel like we could have talked for hours. It goes so quickly.
Hey, my friends, I want to tell you about a coffee company I recently discovered that really lines up with the values we talk about right here at Reading with Your Kids. It's called Caprera Coffee Company, and they're doing things the right way. The coffee is sourced directly from certified Rainforest Alliance farms in Central and South America, with a big focus on farms in El Salvador. I love El Salvador. They work directly with local farmers, support sustainable farming practices, and even use recyclable and combustible packaging. Now, all of that would already make me feel good about supporting them, but honestly, the coffee itself, it's fantastic. You can really taste the quality. The beans are grown in rich volcanic soil and carefully roasted, so the flavor really comes through smooth, rich, and super aromatic. Now, whether you're somebody who loves a strong espresso to get moving in the morning, or you prefer a lighter roast while reading a good book, Caprera has something you're going to enjoy. And this is kind of beautiful. 5% of all their sales goes to charities helping conserve and preserve the great outdoors. So if you'd like to try coffee that tastes amazing and supports good people doing good work, head on over to afreracoffee.com. That's AFUERA coffee.com, and use the promo code READ to get an exclusive 15% off your order. And of course, when you use the code, you're also helping support the podcast. Great coffee and helping families grow closer together. I call that a pretty magical way to start your day. This episode of Reading with Your Kids is sponsored by Ramble Office. You know, before I tell you about Ramble Office, let me tell you about what travel used to look like for me. When I take the Reading with Your Kids studio on the road, it was like a lot. I had one box for the mixer, another case for microphones, a satchel for my laptop, cables everywhere. And I always felt like I was forgetting something. That's why Ramble Office really clicked with me. Rambo takes everything I used to juggle, tech gear, personal stuff, and puts it into one smart, great-looking unit that's designed to be a mobile office, not just luggage. Everything has a place. Everything stays protected. And when you get to where you're going, you're ready to work. Instead of digging through bags or repacking your life every time you move, Ramble keeps your setup organized and ready to deploy. Travel days stop being chaos and start being productive. It's sleek, modern, built for people whose work doesn't stop just because they're on the move. And if your job follows you, whether that's podcasting, teaching, consulting, or creating, Ramble is worth a look. Go to rambleofficeanywhere.com, all one word, rambleofficeanywhere.com. Use the promo code READ, R-E-A-D, and receive 5% off any product. It's exclusive for Reading with Your Kids listeners. Check it out today, rambleofficeanywhere.com, promo code READ. Join us right now from right outside Kansas City, Missouri. Our guest is here today to celebrate her new wordless picture book. It's called Claude. Please welcome to the show, Phyllis Harris. Hey, Phyllis, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Delighted to have you on. We've celebrated a number of wordless picture books recently. It seems to be a new trend, I guess, in kids' books. Tell us a little bit about Claude and how it came about.
Yes, Claude is actually based on a personal experience with my own dog, Brinkley. He's a constant companion in my studio up here in my art studio. And so every time I sit down to either write or illustrate, that just seems to be the time he comes and bothers me and decides he wants to go for a walk or play ball or play something. So that's how the initial story was born. But me as an artist, I'm also a perfectionist. So I tried to get all of these different themes and tie them into one. And also Claude Monet just happens to be my favorite. That era of art is, I love Monet. My daughter and I love it. And we go frequently to the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art where they house three of his paintings. And so we've always been, so I thought, how fun would it be to name a dog Claude? And then that way I can, talk about art, the art of Monet, as well as, maybe put some back matter in the book and help teachers get creative. And so it just all kind of came about mostly from my dog and I trying to get work done. But from there, it kind of morphed into this other idea. So, yeah. But the wordless part was interesting because I literally, I had the whole vision of the book in my head for years, probably at least a couple years before I sat down and put it down on paper. And sometimes I do it that way, and sometimes I write the story and then do the art. But this time all the art came out, and I just could not find the words for the story. And I just looked and realized the story was all there. It didn't need words. And I've always loved wordless picture books. Some of my favorites are wordless, like Wolf by, oh gosh, my brain's going to go blank now, but it was a Caldecott winner, I don't know, a few years back. And it was wordless. And so I've just always loved wordless books.
Yeah. One of the things that we really encourage families to do is to take picture walks through books before you even start reading the text. To sit down, maybe cover the text and just go through the pictures and talk with your kids about, hey, what do you think's going on here? What kind of story do you think we'll hear when we read the words? And just let kids' imaginations run wild. And when I launched the podcast back in 2017, I asked my beautiful wife, I said, how can we get some of your teacher in the inner city? How can we get some of your parents to listen to the podcast? And she said, a lot of my parents, they can't read. Oh, wow. They're not able to read themselves, so they're not going to be reading with their kids, but they can do a picture walk with their kids. They can do a wordless book with their kids and still get a lot of the same benefits.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I feel like it helps build, confidence for maybe early emergent readers that haven't started learning yet. It teaches them about storyline. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also a great way to boost imagination. Like you say, see what kind of story they can come up with on their own. And so it's also, I'm that one of my favorite teachers who teaches 5th grade told me that the wordless books are actually their favorites because they do get to engage. And and the fact that even still he reads picture books to 5th graders, I think is awesome because I never outgrow them. So, yeah. But yeah, they love the wordless because they can come up with their own stories. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's awesome. But
so what's the kind of story that we're going to look at when we read Claude?
I think it's got themes of perfectionism and creativity. It kind of teaches the power of play. I'm a perfectionist, so this little artist in the book is very serious. On the cover, you see she's at the museum with her dog, and it's a Claude Monet painting. It's actually a painting, one of the poppy field paintings. And so she sees that at the museum and she goes home to set out to create her own masterpiece. And so she's a very serious artist. She's trying to get it down on paper. And then the dog has his own storyline going on in the background. He's got other ideas. And so he's trying to take her concentration off of her artwork and trying to get her to engage with him. And I think children can relate with that with parents because so many times they're trying to get our attention and we're always busy. We're busy doing whatever it needs to be done. And so I think they can relate to the dog probably very much so. But as she goes on to create her masterpiece, he gets more and more frustrated, I guess, and decides to take matters into his own hands and begins to chase his tail and play by himself. And because of that, mass chaos, everything goes flying everywhere. And it's basically just a mess. And so, the realization that is it a mess is the whole climax of the book, and where I think kids can embrace their messes and realize that sometimes our messes become masterpieces.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that idea of reminding kids that, yeah, sometimes when we mess up, it's a good thing and we learn.
Yeah, we learn from our mistakes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometimes, happy accidents, we'll make an accident, especially in artwork. I know for myself, I'll think, oh, I messed that up. And then I realize, wait, no, I can use that. I can make something beautiful out of that. So I love that idea, especially for those of us who suffer with perfectionism. And I don't think children even realize that. I think they compare themselves a lot to each other and try to, outdo each other. So I think hopefully this book will help them realize that we all have something to give, with our own creativity.
Yeah. What inspired you to start illustrating children's books?
Oh gosh, from a very early age, I loved art. I had a second grade art teacher that really encouraged me, and I won a poster contest, showing, it had to do with like dental hygiene week. So I drew, Snoopy and said dogs need clean teeth. They need to brush their teeth too. Not realizing that actually dogs do need their teeth brushed. I just thought I was being clever. And so I won first place in a poster contest. And from there, the encouragement of teachers that I had, I started drawing and painting. And, I think I really went after a children's book illustration first. And that was after my daughter was born. We didn't have a lot of children's books growing up, so I really fell in love with them after I had my daughter, and really realized what an art form they were. And so then I started trying to go after that side of it. And I did the illustration side for, my first debut book came out. I don't even remember when this came out, 6 or 7 years ago, as author. Because up till then, I'd illustrated probably around 30 different books for children, both in the educational market, mass market. I've illustrated games for children all through the years. And so finally I decided if I wanted to be an author as well as an illustrator to really start working on the craft of writing as well. I've always gone to conferences and enjoyed learning about it, but I didn't really try to apply it with my own writing as much until I really got serious about 7 or 8 years ago, and then got my first literary agent, and from there kind of it went on. So
Neat. I remember a couple of years back I attended the International Children's Book Festival in Bologna, Italy.
Oh.
And it was a wonderful event, but one of the neat things was, in addition to the hundreds and hundreds of booths from publishers all around the world, there were hundreds and hundreds of aspiring illustrators.
Oh, yeah.
And they were all there, and they all had a look about, like, my beautiful wife and I were walking through, and I just go, that's an illustrator. That's an illustrator. And she goes, how do you know? And I'm like, it's just a look. It's like a hunger to be able to, I always dreamed about going to Bologna. I never got the opportunity, but Claude went this year. My book Claude was taken, so I was kind of there. There you go. Okay. And the other thing you were sharing with me before we hit record is that Claude is also in your local Nelson Pratt Museum, right?
Nelson Atkins, yes. Yes, it's a wonderful art museum, and they house 3 different Monet paintings permanently. So it's, I think it's like the 6th best or largest gallery as far as his work goes. They have one of the largest groups of his work there for everybody to see. So we're really blessed because I was born and raised in Kansas City. And so we've always visited the museum and not realizing what a treasure it is to have those Monets there. So my daughter and I she fell in love with them just like I did when I would take her as a little girl. So she was thrilled when I decided to do a book and about Monet's work. So the back matter really explains a little bit more about that specific painting that is shown on the cover. And also about the fact that I just feel like Monet he didn't use the realism as much as he used light, and his work just feels like he enjoyed playing with light and paint, and it wasn't as serious and like we tend to get as artists. So that was another reason I went with Monet, is I just feel like he got it, he understood. So
when did you fall in love with Monet? What age?
Oh gosh, I bet I didn't go to a museum until, I would say, again, after I had my own daughter. I didn't go to, I went to a community college. So actually, you know what? That's when I learned more about art history. I took an art history class. So yeah, okay. I would imagine that would be when I first, and not realizing that we had some here, until I took our daughter to see and go to the museum myself. So.
Well, if you're listening and you're visiting Kansas City, absolutely check out the museum. My beautiful wife and I visited it a couple of years ago. It is a very impressive museum.
I think so too. We're very blessed to have it.
Tell me, what's the biggest challenge when you receive another author's manuscript, and it's up to you to tell part of that story? What's the biggest challenge for you?
Oh gosh. So much of the time, as an illustrator, your job is to tell, almost like I said, a second storyline. So, to come up with, it's probably very different than what the author had in mind. And sometimes you'll get some art notes, but rarely do the editors leave those in there, because they want the illustrator to bring their own vision of what the story is about. So I think trying to figure out that other storyline that is probably, that can add to what's already beautifully said, by the author. And so I think that's the biggest challenge. It's also so fun, so much fun to do as well. So, but I you know what? I'm really thrilled with doing my own books, and I've fallen so in love with it. Obviously, if I get the right manuscript from another author, I would definitely consider it. But I'm just having so much fun being the author and the illustrator. I have another book coming out in October, also. So it's been a good year for me. It's been tough. Great. It's been tough in the industry, really tough, but this is going to be a good year for me. So
congratulations. That's really wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when you're writing stories, as I have zero skills when it comes to visual art. If you look at the episode art that we create for the podcast, you can tell. But I love talking to artists about their creative process. As you're telling, creating a story in your head, are you seeing the words? Are you seeing or hearing the words first, or are the images coming to you first?
I'd say 9 times out of 10, the images usually come first. In fact, a lot of times I'll draw something in my sketchbook, and it's a character that I just kind of fall in love with and think, okay, what's your story? In fact, the book that's coming out in October, it's called The Day Kindness Came. And the character of Kindness is actually, they showed up in my, it's about a bear and a little girl named Kindness, but they showed up in my sketchbook probably 7 or 8 years ago. And they just kept showing up and showing up and showing up in different forms. And so I kept thinking, oh, wow, this has got to be a story someday, but I just couldn't figure out. It took me 7 years to figure out what the story is about. I always knew it was about kindness, but I couldn't figure out how to tell the story. Wow. So a lot of times they'll show up in my sketchbook, and then I'll go from there and create the stories. But the one story that was different is my book, The Gift Shop Bear. This one was based on, it's a Christmas story. This one was based on my granddaughter, and I was watching her. And so the story on that one came before the artwork. So that was one instance where it was the opposite. But typically I have, I'm drawing all the time. I think art is my first love. I love the writing as well, but since art was my first love, I'll always have that, I think, first most of the time, and then write the words after that. So, and sometimes no words.
Exactly. That's really fascinating to me. So you were saying that the character of kindness, you just kept on drawing it. You know, you draw it, you put it away, and then a couple months later.
Exactly. They were just so intriguing to me. And it's about basically a big bear and this little girl who are total opposites, obviously, and you would never put those two together typically. And you would think the bear would be this, mean character, but it just kept showing up. I bet you I had a dozen drawings before I started, creating the book. And then, I had to come up with some more. So once I decided what the story is about, so.
You just reminded me of an image when my son was playing football, when he was a kid. My daughter wanted to be supportive and help out. And so she'd be on the sidelines. And there was this one day when she was walking across the field with one of the football coaches who actually played professionally, and he was ginormous, huge person. And here's my little daughter who's maybe 5 or 6 years old walking beside him. And it was just such a cool image. It's like, I wish I have a camera here right now.
Oh, yes. Sounds magical.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. Hey, what advice would you have for a parent who has a kid who loves to draw? And how can a parent best encourage their kids who have that artistic streak in them?
Well, I think one thing is make sure there's lots of drawing paper and materials available. Although I didn't have a lot of that, and my dad was a butcher, and he'd bring home butcher paper, so I would draw on butcher paper, and crayons, as long as you have crayons and some paper. And another thing that I think is so important is let the kids draw the way they want to draw. Don't try to tell them a bear is brown, and don't try to tell them, no, that doesn't look right. You need to draw it this way. I think that is the hardest thing to hang on to as an artist, is your imagination, your childlike imagination. And to me, that's where the real art is. And as adults, even in art school, we're taught to, do things a specific way. But I think that creativity, it's so tough for me to try to go back to that place. But when I do, just like with this book, when I go back to that place of play, that's when the magic happens. That's when they really come up with the most brilliant ideas. My granddaughter's constantly drawing these characters that have never existed before. They have their own stories, and they have their own, all of these interesting, characteristics that you would never see in our life. And I love that. I think it's just magical.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. We had one, illustrator on, she was Italian, and she was very nervous because she didn't have strong English, and she was very, very nervous until I asked her that question about how her parents supported her creativity, and she just went on. Her parents painted the walls of her bedroom white, and they said, have at it. Whatever you want to do.
That is wonderful. That would be great.
Yes, yes. And she just lit up, and the English came pouring out of her, and it was wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the passion that really, I go to sleep at night thinking about art and books, and it wakes me up and gets me out of bed in the morning. So there's nothing better than passion. Yeah. So that sounds like her parents inspired that passion in her.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, let's tell everybody where they can go to find out more about Claude and find out more about you.
Okay. I have a website, PHYLLIS Harris, phyllisharris.com. And I also have all the links to my social media there. And so, yeah, just find me on any of those places.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of Claude. Excuse me. Well, yeah, you're the author. It's a wordless picture book, but you're the creator. And so we want everybody to check it out. It's called Claude, and it's from our guest, Phyllis Harris. Phyllis, thanks so much for being with us.
And thank you for having me.
That's a wrap for this episode of Reading with Your Kids. If this episode made you smile or gave you something to think about, please consider sharing a link to the show with someone you love. Leave a 5-star review and, of course, subscribe to the show wherever you find your favorite shows. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful, starting with our wonderful guest, Rebecca Caprera. Please be sure to check out Eva to the Max. Also want to thank Phyllis Harris. Please be sure to check out Claude. I want to thank my incredible team, Daylene Rose, Advina Lopez, Chris Doherty, Ella Badier. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support and love she gives me. Most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every single time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.